Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our Kaya Concierge stage. And who we have this evening, I was just remarking, because, when you get a little bit old, you start being like, oh, remember that time? And, just about this time last year, I think, Kebra, is when we met at Black and Cannabis. Shout out to Kia Jackson, who put together that dynamic event. I mean, really, I kind of just was trying to be like her with this whole virtual event and to kind of mimic the Black and Cannabis experience that she did in DC. And that's where we met, and all these other wonderful folks. There's even a photo of us floating around. I have to post that up sometime when I find it. It has been so great to kind of watch you moving. I've made many suggestions to healthcare professionals that, may be interested in what you do and who you are. So before I get started, because I'm gushing. Before I get started, I would like to make sure that folks know who you are and read a bit of your bio. If you want to find out the whole thing about all the wonderful things, we'll put a link in there. But Kebra Smith Bolden is a true trailblazer, a respected healthcare professional with vision, purpose, and drive to transform the nascent cannabis industry. A registered nurse, Kebra leveraged her medical knowledge and decades of professional experience to create CannaHealth, the first and only Connecticut cannabis business owned by African American. In addition to all of her entrepreneurial ventures, Smith Bolden is a prominent industry advocate, serving as a member of the National Executive Team for Women Grow, a networking organization that empowers women to become leaders and entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry. And she uses her considerable platform and background in mental health to support the disadvantaged communities by studying the use of cannabis in conjunction with therapy for those suffering from complex traumas. And as you see, there's a wonderful a wonderful presentation, presentation that she's about to get us. I want to be all ears. I'm going to be taking notes. So I'm going off and I'm going to let you take it away, Kebra. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's awesome to see you here this year and doing what you're doing. It's amazing. I'm loving too the pivoting. COVID kind of stopped a lot of stuff. So, but thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be here during Black Cannabis Week and to share about something that's very important to our community. And just a little bit about myself outside of that. I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, and I know most people are like, there are Black people in Connecticut? I've heard that before. But not only are there Black people in Connecticut, but there are Black and poor people in Connecticut, Black and disenfranchised people in Connecticut, Black and people who have been traumatized by the war on drugs, over policing in our communities, by lack of access to adequate health care and lack of access to adequate education. And, it really, it's interesting because I'm from New Haven, Connecticut, and because a lot of people don't understand the disparities that exist right within our city, there literally are individuals who are, there literally are everything's gonna ring now too. There are literally individuals who live right across the street from $1 million homes and we're separated by, different neighborhoods, but they're literally right next to each other. And so the disparities are right in your face. And it really has an interesting effect on us. And so, again, I'm so honored and proud to be here. I wish I had closed my door completely. I see it in the background, but we won't worry about that. But a little bit about how I got into the cannabis industry and how I am honored to now be a Black woman in cannabis. About 5 years ago, my grandmother was it's more than 5. It's about 6 years. My grandmother, who was a vibrant, beautiful woman, 88 years old, had a boyfriend, was still driving, was very, very active. She was actually volunteering with her club at a funeral and got struck with the aneurysm. And the aneurysm devastated her mind, her body, her everything. And after being in the ICU and going to rehab, she ended up coming to live with me. I've heard this story, but it's really important to know why, one of the reasons why cannabis is so important to me, and why I feel that our community needs to be informed about its benefits in many different areas of life. But anyway, you know, my grandmother had this aneurysm. She got out of rehab. She came to live with me, and she just was not improving, not progressing, not getting better. And I was just overwhelmed with feeling inadequate, and that I was unable to actually care for my grandmother as I had vowed to do. And they were about to discharge her from rehab therapy because she was not showing any improvements. And I was just so upset, and I knew ultimately what that meant, you know, that she would be, you know, pretty much not helped to improve at this point. And so I just began praying, because I'm a praying child. That's why you can't tell me that God isn't in the cannabis business. Like, that is another thing you'll hear from me often. But I prayed, and I asked God to help me help my grandmother. And during my prayer, I remember my grandmother saying that she used to have to smoke a joint and take a bath just to get her body moving. So I was like, okay, we're getting grandma high. You know, I'm from New Haven. You know, I knew about weed. I knew where to get it from. I knew who to ask. And so I luckily found a caregiver. They consumed with my grandmother, and this went on for about a month before I really saw a change. But I had gradually started seeing changes over the next few weeks, and she just returned to herself. Her mood improved. Her speech improved. She was able to walk with the walker, whereas before she was wheelchair bound. And so it was really, really just like a miracle. It was a complete turnaround. She was engaging with the family again. It just was amazing. And I was like, the only thing we did different was add cannabis to this scenario. So let me, you know, study this a little bit. I'm a nurse. I had been in home care, and I always worked in my city of New Haven in the what have been considered the worst communities, where there's lots of poverty, lots of drug addiction and violence. And that was the community that I chose to serve. But in that serving of them, I felt like I was doing them a bit of a disservice, because I really was not seeing many improvements. And so to see such a turnaround in my grandmother's health in such a short amount of time, I was hell-bent on studying this plant and learning more about cannabis and how it works in the body and the science of the plant. And so I wanted to go to school. I mean, that's what you do, right? When you want to learn about something. And so I found this school in Massachusetts, Northeast Institute of Cannabis. And they had everything from the science of cannabis. I learned about the endocannabinoid system. I learned about cannabinoids and terpenes and profiles and how to match strains of cannabis with symptoms to help manage chronic illnesses and a lot of different things that just excited me, because I'm a science geek deep down on the inside. And so it was very exciting to me. But what engaged me and what made me adamant that I needed to be a part of this industry and to bring this knowledge and information back to my communities was when I learned about the prohibition of cannabis, and learning that cannabis was prohibited just for racially motivated reasons. Like, there were no legitimate scientific based social ails that had happened. There was just a racist man who led a campaign of propaganda and negativity because of the people who consumed cannabis, because Black and brown people consumed cannabis. And he wanted to, you know, he was bored after alcohol prohibition, and he was a racist at heart. So it was the perfect thing to pivot to. Are you talking about pivoting? And then, you know, when we fast forward and we have heard now Nixon's administration and how they felt about Black and brown people, and their goal to criminalize us, even though they knew that, this was not a harmful plant. And then, of course, we fast forward again to, my era growing up in the 80s, 90s, and the war on drugs, and really having that, having that knowledge now. When you grow up in something, it's one thing. Like, yes, when I grew up, I experienced things that were a residual effect of the war on drugs. But at the time, I never put it together. And yes, I have begun to put it together, but this information about how they use this plant, which I just saw heal my grandmother basically, and that I saw as an opportunity for people like me who look like me to be able to engage in what this American dream is supposed to be, home ownership, business ownership, being able to build generational wealth, and seeing that this plant had those capabilities. It was my duty to share that information with as many people as I can who look like me. Also wanting to be a part of, making sure that laws as we are emerging into both medical and adult use cannabis, wanting to make sure that laws were put in place that ensured that people who look like me had opportunities here, and not just because we need a handout. Because let me make something clear, this is not about a handout. This is what's owed to us. And so making sure that we made that clear, like this is owed to us because of the way in which you criminalize us for this plant. So anyway, I'm about to be on my tangent. But the fact of the matter is it's owed to us. Like, we have a space in this industry, we can demand it, because there's no way that we can look at the way the last, how about I say, hundreds of years since slavery, the way in which Black and brown people have been treated in America, how they've been purposely put into systems to destroy our community, our people, to destroy our humanity, to try to make us feel as if we are less than. But guess what? Despite all that, like, we still, and I don't see how we do it, but salute to us people of color who still get up every day with hope, with determination, feeling good about yourself when the world's trying to tell you that you're not worthy. Well, I'm here to let you know that you are worthy, that what's been done to us was done on purpose, and therefore we are owed methods in which to repair the wrongs, and AKA reparations. Cannabis can be a form of that, by giving us opportunities to be first, to be supported, and to be assisted and given opportunities to actually succeed in this industry. So, okay, that's it. That's my little intro. But anyway, I'm here today to talk about something that is, of course, directly related to what I was just talking about, the war on drugs, the history of slavery, Jim Crow, the constant, I don't even know what the constant way in which the system and racists have manipulated the system over and over again to ensnare us and entrap us, and to not inform us, and to make us again think that we're less than. And so one of the effects of all of this is trauma. Like, you can't live every day. You can't watch the George Floyd video of his murder and not be traumatized. Just can't happen. Can't happen. And this is something that's happening on a regular basis. And that's just one of the many things that we experience as people of color. And so, the thing about it is, yes, some of us are it's difficult for us to keep jobs. It's difficult for us to have healthy relationships, some of us. But the reason why we're experiencing these things that kind of are bumping the roads and slow us down, is because we've experienced traumas that we have yet to heal from. And so we're going to talk a little bit about it. I got to stick to my slides, I guess. Let's see. How do I do this? Okay. So let's just talk about what is trauma. So trauma is defined as an emotional and psychological response to an event or an experience that is deeply disturbing, distressing, such as urban trauma. So urban trauma is not listed on the DSM-5 4, excuse me. It isn't separated, but it does fall under the category of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so because it is the overall category, that, it's important that we talk about what PTSD is in its general terms. So post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event, such as a natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist act, war, combat, which is what most people usually associate with PTSD, veterans of war, rape, those who have been threatened with death, sexual violence, or serious injury. So one thing I always remark about PTSD is that for just to have the diagnosis of PTSD, it only takes one event, and that one event may not even have been something you actually experienced. So I was studying about PTSD and urban trauma, and I was talking to a healthcare professional, and she was talking about a patient that she diagnosed with PTSD who had never experienced any physical trauma personally. And she wasn't even born when 9/11 occurred. However, she saw videos of the planes hitting the buildings and was diagnosed with PTSD from the trauma of witnessing the planes hitting the buildings. So, that's remarkable to me because of the fact that, like, we as people of color, we tend to have several experiences, and we're going to talk about it more. But even though we have gone through hell and back, it's as if we're supposed to just shrug it off, And so it's really, really, really important that we acknowledge our pain, that we acknowledge the things that we've seen and we've been through, because, the world will not acknowledge it, but we have to legitimize the feelings that we have. We need to not make jokes when people talk about mental health and illness and anxiety, and really begin to acknowledge that. So, so that's the difference between PTSD and, well, that's PTSD. It could just be that one event. So what is urban trauma? Like I got to tell y'all, but urban trauma is a type of trauma people experience from just living their daily lives. Unlike its overall category of PTSD, which I just spoke about, which only requires you to experience one traumatic event, people who live in urban settings are exposed to multiple, prolonged, they don't stop, repetitive, they keep happening, and extreme traumas, things that most people would see on television and just be traumatized just from seeing it or hearing about it. in many people in urban communities, many Black and brown people, and let me just add poor people, because poor people are just as disenfranchised, and they could be of any color. So, but as many people who have experienced these traumas, some of them are just unheard of things, and then they're expected to just move on and be fine. So anyway, and these traumas, they often begin at birth and are sustained or recur until death. This is the world in which we live. So, I'm not the most technical person, people. Okay, so some of the causes of urban trauma or circumstances that lead to urban trauma are usually related to systemic racism. I could literally drop the mic and stop talking. That's enough to traumatize anyone. Not only is it traumatizing, it's just traumatizing, like every single way possible. Systemic racism is just trauma, because it's almost like you've been put in one of those walking mazes where, every turn, every opportunity that you thought you could get ahead, there's a way to stop you, or a way or something that just makes it almost an impossible hurdle. And so you're dealing with the racism in a system in which you have to live and operate and be. And it really can make people feel hopeless. And so systemic racism is definitely one of the main causes of urban trauma. Poverty, again, being Black, brown, poor, is definitely a circumstance that it not only puts you into potentially a system, but it also potentially puts you at disadvantages in every other area of your life, from education to healthcare to housing to what you're eating, to, food instability, all those things, lack of access to adequate medicine and assistance and resources. It really can be life-altering, of course, as many of us know. Inequities and I just talked about it, healthcare, education, and housing. And then, a lot of people like to shy away from this, but I think it's really important to talk about slavery and the residual effects of slavery. Being a stolen people stolen away from your country, your people, your language, your heritage, from everything, and then dehumanized and sold from your family. Like, imagine what that did to Black males' love for Black women. Like that really had to make a Black man afraid to love a Black woman, because she could be sold off or taken by the master for his bidding, or whatever. And that kind of thing can leave an indelible mark in people's brains. And we're going to talk about how trauma can alter genetics, and you end up passing this trauma down from generation to generation, having your children sold off from you. I was watching something a while ago, and they were talking about how they had these two mothers, and the white mother was talking about, they both had sons, and the white mother was talking about her son and saying, oh, he's doing this and he's doing that, and he's such an awesome child. And the Black mother, whose son was surpassing the white mother's child, was reluctant to share about her son. And that comes from not wanting your child. Like, if you look at slavery, and this was a correlation that the doctor made, was that if you look at slavery, a Black mother didn't want to, boast about her son being healthy and strong, because he might get sold or beaten or worse. And these things follow us for generations. we need to start educating ourselves of why we do some of the things we do, why we act the way we act, why we treat each other the way we treat each other. Of course, the war on drugs, we talked about that. I always tell the story about how when I was in high school, going into my freshman year, a young man that I had gone to preschool with was murdered. He was shot and killed. It probably, who knows now when you find out about how many communities were infiltrated and wars were started by people who wanted those things to happen. But anyway, this young man who I had known since preschool was murdered. And this was my freshman year in high school. And at that point in time, violence was not happening as often, but it was happening. And so I went to school. We found out that his name was Sebastian. We found out Sebastian had been murdered. They literally shut the school down. They sent us counselors. They gave us opportunities to share how we felt. We had no classes. It was just, I felt like we were cared about that day. But by the time I graduated from high school, there were hundreds probably of murders or arrests for murders or drug arrests or whatever, people who were stolen out of my school, my community. And they stopped sending counselors. They stopped shutting down the school. They stopped acknowledging the pain that obviously is going to happen when someone that you've grown up with, that you've been going to school with, that's your friend, that's you love, that just is murdered. But that just goes to show that these behaviors, these traumas have been normalized in our community, and because they stopped acknowledging it, and we had to just move on. If someone got killed overnight and we had school the next day, we were expected to show up and shut up. That was just it. And there are and that's just one type of trauma. There's so many traumas that people have experienced. So because of the war on drugs, over policing, I can go on and we'll talk about it a little bit more, but those are some of the causes of urban trauma. And just like, these are the images that we're shown of ourselves. And some of the images we've had to see or we've had to share so that people could realize our humanity. I like this picture because it said, this is our collective PTSD. Like everybody's suffering. So the types of trauma experienced in urban communities. So rape, and I put these kind of randomly, but healthcare inequities, and a lot of these can happen in any community, but you tend to see the majority of them or all of them in our communities. Healthcare inequities, we talked about that. There's murder, foster care, violent crimes, drug and alcohol addiction, which is a trauma in and of itself, and the residual effects that it has on children and families, food insecurity, not having access and not being able to start your day off with breakfast, not being able to feel like you're going to have anything for dinner. And I'm so concerned about the kids nowadays that aren't going to school because of COVID and just how they're coping. I pray for them on a regular basis. Poverty is trauma. Lack of access to adequate education. If you never know this is happening, if you've never been given that knowledge and information, you'll never begin to do things to be better. Over policing. When we look at the disparities in arrests for Black and brown people, Black people specifically, regarding cannabis, and how we were targeted and our communities are targeted, and that they instead of protecting and serving us, they're occupying us. That's traumatic. I was watching a video of a young man here in Connecticut who was playing basketball in his driveway, and a police car came, or he had a ball, I don't know if he's playing, but a police car came by, and the poor little boy went and hid behind a truck that was in their driveway because he was afraid of the police. I mean, that should not be happening, but that in and of itself is traumatic. Domestic violence. And again, these happen in all communities, but these are some of the things that cause trauma to us. And many people will have experienced almost everything on this list, if not directly, because like, let's say they weren't addicted to drugs or alcohol, but they had a parent who was, or, a family member. Lack of representation, that's traumatic. Like if everything you see is the opposite of you, and that is what is being called beautiful and worthy, or that's trauma. Again, post-slavery syndrome, I can have a whole nother presentation about this, but know that it exists, and that is part of PTSD, that's part of urban trauma, post-slavery syndrome. Child abuse, mass incarceration. And we know that they have a thing they created. We now found out about the preschool to prison pipeline, school to prison pipeline. And by third grade, they're already identifying which one of our boys will be in prison and treating them as such, to make sure that happens. And yes, people are becoming aware, and are able to intercept and intercede. But what if you're struggling yourself? Like as a mother, I know that there have been times when things that I was experiencing to me were so traumatic that it took everything I had to still do what I needed to do on a daily basis for my children. But I have faith. I have family, I do know that I always have had hope, and I'm thankful for that because I had a foundation in faith. But what about the people who don't have that and everything is against them, or they feel that way? And then they have to deal with issues with the child. It can be quite overwhelming. And it's really important that we not judge people, but we understand that we meet people where they are, and that we allow them the opportunity to see themselves, like, okay, this is where you are. Let me show you what I see, and help that person move from there. Like we have been damaged. I used to say broken, but I don't want to say broken, because broken kind of indicates that you can't fix yourself. And I don't even think it's to that. Like they tried to break us, but we have overcome, and we have done beyond what we should have even done. As a people, we have been resilient, we have been steadfast. And so I'm just really, really proud of my Black and brown brothers and sisters, my Black folks who have just overcome obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, because these things that I just listed, like I said, there are people who have actually experienced every single one of them, and not just once, not lived in poverty for a short time and now they're on the come up. No, these are people who were born in poverty, died in poverty, never felt they had an option. These are people who experienced traumas like rape, or people who have been victims of domestic violence and have stayed in that cycle or have never ever gotten any assistance, any therapy to help heal those traumas. And so, it's really important that we acknowledge these things. Like if you have experienced any of these things, it had to have an effect on you, and that it would behoove you to talk to someone and to begin to really acknowledge, I am very overprotective of my children, almost to the point of insanity. And there's a reason for that. It's because someone violated me as a child. And so I want to make sure that doesn't happen to my children. That hypervigilance is one of the symptoms that we see often in PTSD, in urban trauma. So again, I talked about this a little earlier, but urban trauma, I just want to, and it's not really versus, listen, we're not having a who's more traumatized and who competition. And truthfully, PTSD, again, is the overlying category for urban trauma. However, I do think because of the fact that it's not acknowledged in our community and that we are expected to get over everything that happens to us, I think it's important to talk about why this particular trauma is so different. And so again, it's repetitive, sustained traumatic events. It is almost always experienced, witnessed personally, and or being told of the events. But the caveat to that is that if you're even being told of an event, like for instance, I was not present. Again, I'll use, I could use so many. When Trayvon Martin was murdered, I was not present for that. However, the trauma of that young man being murdered by that sick person affected me in such a way. As a mother of two teenage boys, still now, I have triplets. I have 4 children, 2 girls, 2 boys, and 3 of them are triplets, and 2 of my triplets are boys. And I remember being so scared for them. I was telling them, don't walk up the street, I live in a pretty good neighborhood in New Haven. At the time, I really had no safety concerns, but certain parts of the neighborhood weren't that diverse, and I was just so concerned, similar to the nice neighborhood Trayvon Martin was in, and I was so concerned, and I was like, don't wear your hoods when you're walking, and if you get stopped, I was so concerned for them. That's trauma, that's hypervigilance now, because I'm scared that it's gonna happen again. And I don't want it to happen to anyone else, but definitely not my children. It can be experienced by anyone who grows up in an urban area. So that's why I included poor people in general, because, there are some people who experience similar things as we do. And if not for, yes, maybe their skin color isn't Black, but because they associate with us, because they feel akin to us, they get criminalized as well. But yes, anyone in an urban area can experience this. And it's often, again, unacknowledged and normalized. So no one ever talks about this. No one tells you, going to prison is created to break you in 30 days. So if you are in prison for more than 30 days, it is probably essential that you have some sort of counseling to deal with the system that tried to break you. These aren't conversations that people have. They're expected to just get out of prison and go back into the world, when we're never acknowledging that at every step of life, there's a hurdle put in front of them. They're stopped. They can't get work because of their felony. They can't vote for people to put the right laws into place so that they can work and participate in life. They can't find housing because they have a felony. They can't, obtain assistance with education because of a felony, a drug charge, excuse me for that. But, there's so many things that end up happening that it's everything, again, is against you, and so it's necessary for people who experience these traumas, again, to get help, to talk to someone, and to receive therapy. Okay. So again, PTSD again only has to be one. Oh, look at that. It's all small. But it has to be one traumatic event. You may have only been told about the event, as I said, and it's often associated with veterans only. And PTSD, the generalized form, is almost always acknowledged and legitimized when people say, hey, I was a veteran and I have PTSD. Nobody usually questions that. But if you say I was a veteran of the war on drugs, like I grew up in the mean streets of an inner city that was over policed, that had drugs fed into the community, that had corrupt people in government, in leadership, in the police department and the different departments that are supposed to help people, just to criminalize people and throw people in prison and break up families and take fathers out of homes. If you look at it like that, it really is amazing that we're able to overcome a lot of these things that we've experienced. Okay. Let's see. So symptoms of trauma. The most common symptoms of trauma, and I kind of spoke about a few of them, include feelings become intense. Feelings become intense and sometimes are unpredictable. So that's something that you experience if you have trauma. Flashbacks, repeated and vivid memories of the event that lead to physical reactions such as rapid heartbeat or sweating. So you could just be walking up the street and get a whiff of something, and suddenly you're back at that time in your life before you were attacked, before you were arrested, before you saw your best friend murdered, and it just devastates you in that moment, or you can't sleep like whatever it is. That's what a flashback is. Confusion or difficulty making decisions. I mean, if you are constantly told that every way is not going to work out for you, everything is going to be questioned about you, it's going to be hard to make decisions. And then especially if your mind is on the repeated events that you've experienced or that you saw your mom experience or whatever, it just makes it very, very difficult. Of course, sleeping issues. Many people who have suffered traumas not only have difficulty sleeping, but they also have nightmares. And so one of the things, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but one of the things that we see with people with urban trauma and PTSD is that when they consume cannabis stops dreams, because of the REM cycle and some other things. But essentially, a lot of people, like, I haven't had a dream in a very, very long time. A lot of people do not have dreams at all. And that is so helpful for people who suffer from nightmares and night terrors and memories of events that keep them from sleeping. Again, fear, eating issues. Of course, there are many people who overeat comfort foods or who are bulimic or anorexic and are not eating adequately because of the event and the trauma, and that's how their symptoms are manifested. Ooh, wait, no, go back. I don't think I know how to do that, y'all. Let's see. I'm gonna try. Oh, I don't know. It's gonna get worse. There we go. I figured it out. So a change in interpersonal relationship skills, such as an increase in conflict, or they're more withdrawn or avoidant with their family and friends or people that they love. A lot of times, people will have difficulties maintaining relationships because of trauma. That trauma just ends up causing people to have difficulty relating to others, sharing with others, opening up to others. And so, that can be another area in which you see the manifestation of a trauma. And then physical symptoms, like, trauma, definitely a lot of people associate traumatic events with some sort of, or it's manifested in some sort of physical way. So like you can have someone who becomes nauseous, someone who has headaches, and someone who may experience chest pains as they are recalling or dealing with the physical trauma. Anxiety. More. So you avoid reminders of the trauma. So, when you are from a neighborhood where you've seen lots of violence, like you may not want to ride down the street where your homeboy was murdered. You don't want to go to a restaurant that, you were treated, you were discriminated against. Like there are things that you just avoid just to not deal with that trauma. Reliving the event. And again, these are nightmares, but reliving the event through recurring nightmares or other intrusive images that occur randomly at any time. So you could just be minding your business and not even have a smell or a sound or a visual, but just get stopped in your tracks with that memory. That's one of the symptoms and signs of urban trauma. Being on guard, and I talked about this earlier, or hyper aroused at times, including feeling sudden anger or irritability, having difficulty sleeping, or a lack of concentration, or being overly alert and easily startled. That's me. Like, I'm one of them people, like, I'm always easily, like, I'm jumping. People like, what's wrong with you? Something happened to me, that caused me to feel that way. And that's what a lot of people who have traumas, they again have all of these, they feel like they always got to be on guard. Once I can only imagine how Breonna Taylor and such an injustice that was performed today by no one being charged with that young lady's murder, that young sister's murder. But I could just imagine her boyfriend. Like, how could he even sleep at night? Like, he's got to be on guard all the time. And that's a symptom of the trauma that he experienced. Okay, so effects of urban trauma, if left untreated, it can lead to a variety of very serious symptoms, including, I hit the wrong thing. Bear with me, people. Anger management issues. So, you've dealt with these traumas. You tried to, you got out of that situation, but you're still mad. You're still having difficulty. You're, having outbursts towards people. This is a sign of that you're affected by urban trauma. You just are angry. Loneliness, because of the fact that, you're angry, you're hypervigilant, you're anxious, you're irritable. Nobody wants to be around you, but you need people because you need to be able to heal, but you feel so lonely on the inside because you have now isolated yourself through your behaviors, through your symptoms, through your difficulties. Severe depression. In our community, we don't talk about mental health enough, but there are many people who are actively walking around but are depressed. And that depression can be so severe if left untreated, if you do not get help. It can be stifling. It can be paralyzing. And so it's really important that you get treatment so you don't go to the severe level of depression. Suicide. PTSD and urban trauma are one of the leading causes of suicide amongst people from urban communities, from veterans, from people who experience trauma are more likely to commit suicide and feel like there is no hope. Abuse of others, hurt people. And that is like something that we hear all the time. And people, I definitely have used myself, but it is very true. Like people who have been abused may abuse others. And so this is what happens if you don't get help. If something has happened to you and now because of the fact that you did not get the help that you needed, it could lead to you hurting someone else. And you don't want to do that. Individual distress can range from transient symptoms, so, little irritability here, to actual, being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, to a more complex trauma-related disorders with the potential to disrupt functioning across multiple domains. Complex trauma, the disorders that accompany that severe depression, that severe anger, that inability to cope, that withdrawal, all that stuff can affect so many areas of your life, and not just your mental health, but your physical health, but your relationships, but your job, but your financial. And if you don't have money coming in or ability to make money, then it can affect your finances, your housing, all of that. But not only that, it can also, again, as I mentioned, cause health issues. If you're in a state of constant stress, your immune system is weakened. A predisposure to chronic illnesses, again, with the weakened immune system, poor dietary habits, not getting enough sleep, activity, whatever it is, can lead to more chronic illnesses. And we already, as a community, have a predisposure to chronic illnesses, but I just want to talk about this for a second. Not because we necessarily have bad genes or anything. Like if you put people in a situation where they don't have access to adequate health care, they can't easily get treated for things that ail them, for symptoms that they're attempting to manage because they don't have resources to do so. That can lead to chronic illnesses too. I hate this idea that, just because you Black, you got to have high blood pressure. No, maybe you have high blood pressure because you can only afford to purchase foods that are prepackaged or high in sodium, and that's why you have high blood pressure, not because your mama's mama had it, but it tends to be as if Black people only, they're the ones that it's just in us. No, some of it has been created by systemic racism and health inequities. Exacerbation of chronic illnesses. So not only are you dealing with diabetes, but you're also not able to get access to your testing supplies or to your insulin or the meds that you need. And so because of your depression or your withdrawal or your lack of ability to work because the trauma has paralyzed you. And so your diabetes not only continues, but it gets worse. So now you're looking at loss of limbs, and you're looking at, stroke and different things that lead one to another. And this is, this could be related directly to trauma. Mental fragility. Again, if you're always on edge, always on guard, always just wondering when the next hammer is going to drop, or if your mother was like that, or your father was, or your grandmother, these are things that are passed down from generation to generation. And then now you suffer from this trauma and you can't even get it together. Like you're either depressed or anxious or, dealing with a myriad of emotions and symptoms, and you're just weak, torn down, and hopeless. And that is what can happen if you do not get help with urban trauma. Loss of hope. Oh, and let's see, can I go back? Loss of hope. And I just mentioned it a little bit, but that's really important to kind of take a moment to think about. Like, one thing I always applaud about Black people is that even in the midst of some of the worst situations, like some of the things that I think sometimes that non-colored folks think that we're angry or like we want to get them back or we're trying to do. No, we just want to live and be happy because we do believe that there is hope. And so once we've lost that hope, it really could be a sad thing. Oh, am I out of time? I don't know. I don't know what's happening. Okay, let me hurry up. So a little bit about genetics and urban trauma. Researchers are studying the effects of urban trauma on genetics, citing that events in someone's life can change the way their DNA is expressed and how that change can be passed on to the next generation. This is the process of epigenetics, where a person's genes are modified without changing the DNA code itself. Instead, little chemical tags are added or removed from our DNA in response to changes in the environment in which we're living. Therefore, if your I should have put a couple more greats, grandmother was a slave who endured beatings, rape, having her children sold off, even though she never had the opportunity to raise, would have the same reaction to traumatic events. Isn't that something? This is something we can be passing down to our children. If we don't get help. And then treatments for urban trauma. I think my time is pretty good. So therapy is something that I think is extremely important. There are many ways in which you can engage in therapy. It doesn't have to be traditional talk therapy. They got all kinds of stuff now. You can ring bells, lay on couches. You could do, tap your ear. Like, it's all kinds of stuff that you can do now. So think outside of the box and be open to it. Again, living in society today in 2020, it's traumatic. Every day is something on the news. Every day we're being told some other thing that is just devastating every other day. And we're living in a pandemic. So, we need therapy. I'm pretty sure we all probably need it at this point. But definitely if you grew up in the hood and all your homies was murdered and you saw the tragedies that happen in the hood, then you need therapy. So again, there are ways in which you can engage in therapy that are non-traditional. You can go to group therapy. There are support groups for people with urban trauma and people who experience hood trauma. And it's really important. I suggest it for everyone. I'm in therapy, even though I haven't been in the last couple of weeks because I've been so busy. But I'm missing my therapist because I know it's important. I have to be whole and healed to help make others whole and healed. And so I'm committed to that. And so I think it's really important, and I suggest everybody does it. Oh, it's 8:00. I think I'm done. But a couple other things. Education. So education is extremely important because if we do not know, there's nothing we can do about it. We do not grow if you do not know. So it's important that we educate ourselves about the trauma that is experienced in our community, the trauma that we have never put a name to. We need to know it. We need to know what was done. We need to watch documentaries like The 13th, which shows you how the mass incarceration system, again, I can't think of the word. I want to say it just morphed. That's the word. Morphed itself into another way in which to disenfranchise and keep people of color locked up since slavery. So it's really important though that we educate ourselves. And then medications, again, what's the use of taking a medication, whether it's pharmaceutical or we're talking about cannabis, if all you're doing, because all it's going to do is manage the symptoms. It's not going to heal, not going to make you whole. It's not going to do anything. Traditional pharmaceuticals more than likely get you addicted, damage your liver, and have you stuck. Have you somewhere where you cannot function. And so you definitely need to take medicine and be open to medication therapy in conjunction with some sort of therapy to help you heal. And then medical cannabis, of course, I am a proponent of medical cannabis. Most states who have medical cannabis programs allow patients who have a diagnosis of PTSD or they allow them to be diagnosed with PTSD, which again is the only diagnosis you can get for urban trauma, to consume cannabis to manage those symptoms. And there are a variety of ways in which you can consume cannabis. You can smoke it, you can drink it in a tea, you can apply, you can do a bunch of different things. And you can also, but the things that cannabis can do for you as a person who's suffering from trauma are, you can never, ever probably I could probably go on and on about it. But not only does it help to depending on the strain, and you have to know, how to pick the right strain to manage the symptom in which you're suffering at the time. And so if it's sleeplessness, of course, you want something high in CBG, something that is indica strain, something that will help you sleep. But again, it's more than just the indica. I'm just saying that because we're at the end and I got to hurry up. But it's the cannabinoid profile. So making sure you have cannabinoids that help with sleep. If it is a matter of hypervigilance, something to kind of decrease your anxiety and allow you to relax, a specific strain to do that. If it's someone who's dealing with a sexual trauma, it's really important that they get those feelings out. And sometimes it's hard to talk about something like that in a group setting or with the therapist. And so they consume cannabis to kind of let their guards down and be able to talk about it and feel safe in that environment to do so. And then not only are there the mental health benefits of cannabis, but then because of the fact that a lot of times people who suffer from urban trauma or come from urban communities also suffer from chronic illnesses, cannabis is able in many cases to help people with things such as hypertension, because it's a vasodilator. So it helps to bring down the blood pressure, but it's important to, know what you're doing and that, your doctor knows, or that you're talking to a healthcare professional, because of the fact that it does lower blood pressure if you're taking the medicine. Okay. But anyway, so not only can it help you with your mental health issues and managing the symptoms of urban trauma and PTSD, but it also can help address some of the illnesses and chronic illnesses that people tend to have. So I know it's after my time, and I probably I'm sorry, I could go on and on and on, but it's really just important that we begin talking about this. We begin acknowledging these tears, acknowledging the things that people are struggling with, and begin getting help for it. Cannabis is great. I love it. It has helped me tremendously. However, and helped many people at CannaHealth, which is my company, where we do medical cannabis evaluations and get people certified. We also diagnose people with urban trauma, and I'm not finding just one check off of things people have experienced. It's the entire page that they're checking off. So our community is hurting, but our community can be made whole, and there's opportunities to heal. And I thank you for listening, and I hope I was helpful. And if you need more information, please feel free to reach out. My email address is Kebra Kebra at visitcannahealth.com.
Thank you so much, Kebra. Now, one thing I'm going to ask you to do, and I didn't want to interrupt your presentation, but I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen so that people can get the full, you were doing presentation mode the whole time. So I want people to get the full effect
Okay.
What you had going on here in the hair that was playing.
Oh yeah. That's right. So, I remember seeing Oprah one day. I was like, "Oh, I want Oprah here. I got Oprah here today."
Thank you so much for bringing so much levity and so much care, and so much information. I'm just looking at the chat on the side, and everybody's saying that they loved everything about the presentation, and that. It's probably because of the way you got the computer thing. But yeah, people are raving because they feel like I do, that you're really, really awesome. And I didn't see any questions, but I always have questions. So and just before we leave, I'm always sort of left with the same kind of question when I hear from professionals like you, and it's, what can the individual do? Like, if we believe that this is an issue, if we are like, you know what, you are absolutely right. I specifically am entirely pissed about Breonna Taylor, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm already a patient, right? Like, what can we do as individuals to be supporting, social justice in ways that you've seen effective, maybe in Connecticut? What could we be doing? Because I think a lot of times people, that's part of I feel like urban trauma too, is the helplessness that you talked about. Yeah. What can we do? Like, where should we be going? Who should we be supporting? And who should we be looking to for more information?
Mm-hmm. I definitely think that it's important to have culturally competent care. And so I would suggest that if you feel like you're suffering from symptoms of urban trauma, and again, I don't think many people question that anymore within our community. We're acknowledging it finally. I suggest that people go and find culturally competent therapists and engage with them as far as, being a change agent. The first thing any and everybody here should be doing is voting. Like, that is going to make a difference. And I'm telling you, a lot of people think that there's this big, like Biden is, no, there are a lot of people who are on the low voting for Trump, on the out, not on the low voting for Trump. And if we have another term of Trump, it's going to get worse for us, and the trauma will be worse. And, so that's the second thing I would say. And the third thing is, once you have exercised your right to vote and you have people in office, well, you have to engage with them. You have to tell them what you see in your community, what you see that your community needs, and how you think we can make changes. So you have to have some ideas. Like, if you go up to them and just say, my community has suffered and is poor and we need to, okay, what? Luckily we have cannabis now to bring in this conversation. So you can say, well, if you legalize cannabis for adult use and you make sure our communities are the ones that benefit from that so that we can repair the wrongs that were done, then you're making a difference. So those would be my 3 little action tabs: get therapy, vote, and then speak to the people that you vote to about the change you want to see.
That's it. You can drop the mic right there. Nothing else. Thank you so much. I think we have all been, truly blessed and affirmed, right? Because it's one thing to feel what we feel. It's another thing to know that there's so much studying and learning, and people that continue to sort of pull the data from us to let it, so that we're represented.